here for getting up and getting out on a glorious, glorious Saturday morning. Really appreciate your coming over. And I think if those of you who are in the back want to move up, it's one of the classic sort of things, so you don't feel isolated back there. An intimate group. All of you here know all of these people, but I will just give their names briefly. Walter Ostrom, I think most of you heard his wonderful lecture on Thursday night, which launched our spring extravaganza. Rob Silberman, next to him, is at the university, and a couple of years ago talked with Jamie and me about, you should do a show on the garden. And so we said, be careful what you wish for. And so we got to do it. And as those of you who've seen the show have seen, he did a wonderful job selecting artists. Kinji Akagawa teaches at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and I guess he got a visa to come to the university. I didn't, kind of hands across the river, kind of Franklin Avenue kind of thing. And did a wonderful installation piece. Jan McKeachie-Johnston on the far end did a beautiful installation of vases, and Jan is going to speak loud and strong for this gathering, and not let the guys kind of overwhelm her. So take it away, Rob, and again, thanks to all of you for coming. Oh, now I turn this thing.
Doesn't begin to describe where I am at square zero, but I thought I would show a few slides just to get us thinking gardens. And I don't know if you folks up front can see these, but it sort of ill behooves me to be speaking in front of Walter, who's an expert on ceramic history. But these are some slides. I'm just going to show a few and go quickly, but these are some slides from Persia. I mean, obviously the beautiful gardens in Persia, these are from Shiraz, and the floral motifs, and I thought I would, whoops, let's try that. Nope. Okay. I mean, the kinds of floral motifs in the tiles, in the pavilions, in the garden are just spectacular. And one ceramic work, this is from the late 17th century, this is Kerman. I mean, if we start actually looking at examples of ceramics decorated with floral designs, we'd be here for the rest of the millennium. And then gardens I wish I'd visited. We were talking, Walter, the would-be tour operator was telling all of us a little while ago go to Turkey. I was in Italy, and we were talking about food, but we didn't get to gardens particularly. But this is the Villa Garzone, and the reason this interested me is that one of the things I discovered, of course, and there may be real garden experts here who traveled all over Europe looking at gardens, which I haven't done, but now I'm perfectly willing to do and eat on the side, was the relationship between clay and stone or metal. As I say in the essay I wrote for the show, stone or metal in the north generally, except in the summer, terracotta in the south. And one of the things about this garden is it has remarkable terracotta work. So this is the view from above the staircase. That's the view from below the staircase. And yeah, and it should always look like that when on the day we come, right? And then these, you know, ceramic artists at your marks make seats. Look at those. And a kind of picturesque, decayed version of the figure. Of course, one of the nice things, I was just going to bring in as visual aid a flower pot, but one of the nice things is, I mean, you don't have to have anything quite so grand as that staircase and all those figures and those fancy chairs. You can have this simple pots beautifully displayed, which I think is a nice reminder for those of us who don't live in a villa with a grand staircase. This is Londriana. This is another villa, but again in terracotta. And then this falls under the category of not exactly gardens, but places I have been and want to get back to. As some of you may know, this is Parque Güell above Barcelona, designed by Gaudí, with the great serpentine benches. And in those benches, you have mosaic and bits of ceramic, Giuliano Frio style, assemblage. And that gives you a sense of the play. So there are all kinds of possibilities besides plates, statues, and flower pots for using ceramics. And this is kind of a remarkable one. And then just a few pots, since Eddie isn't here to talk about pots that may or may not have influenced him, I thought this is a wonderful dessert set by Wedgwood. That whole play would making the work actually look sort of take on the form of the plant. So these are early British. This is from around 1810, dessert service. And there's that whole genre of pots in the form of, this is a cabbage teapot from Langton Hall. This is around 1755. And this is a cabbage tureen. And I just pulled this slide. Apparently this is in the MIA. So this is from before 1754. Pretty wonderful, playful stuff, but also virtuoso work. And this slide's a little washed out, but I couldn't resist. This is for Kurt Wieser. It's cropped at the top, but that's a rhinoceros up there. And you can see, and there's this wonderful, I mean, you know, what is going on? And then this is where it's washed out. But if you can see it, you know, I mean, anyone here made pots with cloth? But there is a little pavilion, so this scene is kind of Kurt Wieser without the nude woman and the, you know, but I mean, what a pot. Forget classicism for a second. That's a Rockingham pot from around 1830. And then this is for Walter, whose flower bricks I love so much. The one in the exhibit's so beautiful. But this is a bulb pot from Bar Worcester from around 1800 that I just thought was exquisite. And a little more class. No claws on this one, and no rhinoceros at the top, but what a piece of work. And then lastly, gardens I want to see. This is number one on my list, and this is sort of for Kinji. Oh, if I can get there. I keep hitting the power. That's Ryoanji, the Zen Garden in Kyoto, which is the number one place I want to go. So a brief tour, a very, very brief tour of gardens and ceramics. But I mean, obviously every culture has its own kind of gardens and its own kind of ceramics, and the play between the two can be extraordinary. So I thought I'd just show that while the caffeine took effect, and now I'm going to let Jan take over and talk about her garden. so I think this one goes off and this one goes on. I think that I don't see it, but can we get the other projector on or no? I guess not. I thought I could control it from down here, but I guess it'd have to go on from up there.
Which forward button?
So it should be, what's that? You want it on first? Okay, so it's on the right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Well, first you say this morning, Rob assured me that this was going to be fun, and I trust Rob. I was a little bit shy about being on this panel, being the introverted kind of reclusive pottery gardener that I am, and considering the male academic, intellectual, master gardeners, and Walter's been the most self-effacing person I've never met. But if I was given a choice of people to be up here with, I couldn't have picked a better group. I feel really honored. There's nothing I'd rather talk about than gardens and pots, except when I said that to Randy, he said, how about kids? So we'll put that in there too. But I'm hoping my intuitive approach to gardening and my clay work will kind of add a different flavor to the conversation. So I have a few slides of my gardens. They're very wild country gardens, not a lot of planning, very spontaneous approach to garden design. Walter, in his lecture on Thursday night, mentioned that the virtue of necessity in gardening and how what you have available kind of dictates how your garden goes. I think in his case it was about the rocks and how he lives on rocks, he lives on granite, and how that has dictated his garden design and the plants that he grows. My garden actually started probably about 25 years ago on this hillside in front of the house, and the reason that it started was because it was not a mowable area, so something had to be done to make it manageable. I think the other thing that inspires the beginning of gardening is people giving you plants. And I mean, if you have a heart, you have to plant them, so you have to kind of figure out where they go. These are actually Randy's lilies. I'll give him credit. He's a lily lover, and every year brings new lilies to the garden. Unlike Walter, and I hope that maybe he'll clarify this for me, because he talked about the separation for him of the garden and the studio work, and that it was too simple in a way of a solution to go from the garden into the studio. I think because I'm a person who's very easily overstimulated, that I have a tendency to integrate everything and make it as simple as I can. So I think with myself, the garden and the studio are interplay constantly. And in fact, I do have flowers in my vases before the clay is dry, typically. So a lot of flowers that can take care of themselves. Phlox and bee balm. This is a beautiful stone planter as you walk up to our house Randy built for me many years ago. It always has begonias in it, which is a kind of a remembrance of my mom. Somebody who wrote that article, Mason Riddle wrote an article about Randy and I, and it was in the paper last year, and it was funny because she mentioned that we have 5 decks. And I think it's kind of ironic because we rarely sit down but we have all of these areas for chairs, and this is kind of out of focus, I think. But Randy has enhanced our gardens with sculptures. Let's see if I can get it in focus a little bit. That stone and, well, I guess that's it. Just a bad slide. Not one that I usually show. But I don't know what to say about that. Any of you who've had these datura know that they're very invasive, and I can see I've got millions of them seeded from last year in one area of the garden. Randy's very worried. He's the eradicator. Can we burn these things? Can we get rid of these seed pods? It's dangerous. But they're so beautiful. They're just, I mean, I wouldn't want to be without them. And the same with this. This, I believe, is a rudbeckia that my neighbor gave me, and it just seeds like crazy, and I absolutely adore it. It's one of the last things to bloom in the fall. Huge plant, like a bush. I'm planning to do the whole hillside by the new studio with relatives. These two have the honor of being in the show because they seeded themselves last year, and I think of them as a married couple. They were just so sweet. This one's a little out of focus too. I think gardening, typically people are first focused on the bloom, and then as you garden for a while, you become more interested in foliage, and you think about color, or this is my case anyway, and contrasting foliage and texture of foliage, and then gradually becoming aware of more sculptural qualities, maybe stones and conifers, which I thoroughly enjoyed seeing Walter's conifers, the dwarf conifers. So in Nova Scotia, you bring in ground. In Wisconsin, we bring in rocks. Yes, yes. We were so excited. The man who delivered these rocks called himself the Rock Fairy. And he was pretty wild. I thought he was going to be an old man because when he called, these rocks were across from the grocery store and they said for sale. And Randy and I went, oh, wow, let's call and find out about those. So get a hold of this guy, and then he calls back and he says, this is the Rock Fairy. And I thought this is going to be some wonderful old character. Well, it turned out he was our age. And he brought his girlfriend with him who was a little rough. And he was unloading. He had this old, I don't know what it's called, the lift that had to move these rocks into place. And we were trying to direct and decide how we wanted them oriented. And she was the whole time next to me saying, wow, you know, this would be a really good one to put your address on. And she's like, do you use snowmobile? Because this path that these rocks are on is just perfect for that, you know? You could just go right through here. It was pretty funny. This is a really wonderful grass. If anyone wants it, it's out in the woods. It was the last thing in the fall looking out that was green, and it's one of my favorite things in the garden. Borrow from your immediate resources, I guess. I have a lot of slides of this. I said it was a redundant show, and in fact. But there's something about this path. We call this the Zen Garden, and this is the final phase of gardening where we work toward maintenance-free gardening. Still haven't conquered the bulbs. I put a few slides of pots in that might relate to the garden or do relate to the garden. Most of them are vases. I put this one in to show the leaf motif. I did work with Myolica for a short time and enjoyed the color and the playfulness of the clay. I think what I realized was that you have to be really, well, for what you have to accommodate your form to the clay. And it's a much looser clay, and because of the decorative qualities, more playful. But then what I concluded, I always say I'm going to go back to this in the summer, you know, when you feel kind of free to be a little bit sillier. But what I concluded was you have to be really clever to surprise yourself, because the kiln really isn't helping you. These are pretty big watering cans. They're probably about 14, 15 inches tall. Polka dots. We had leaves, polka dots. I don't have any arabesque. Baskets have been a form that I've worked with for as long as I can remember. I think, again, because I like to keep things kind of simple. I like the play that happens just between a handle and a body. There's a lot of room for play with proportion and balance, and with just having two elements. It's a fun exercise, unlike teapots where we have to worry about spouts and lids. And I liked Walter's comment about how nice it is that almost any form you make can be called a vase. It gives you permission as a functional potter to make anything you want and then just say, oh, it's a vase. They aren't always so easy to arrange, but they work. So wood firing, as opposed to the Mayalika, always kind of collaborates in a finished work, and you do get the surprise that happens when you unload the kiln, because you never really know what's coming out. So that's kind of what I'm into right now. Two-part vases, started probably making them 15 years ago, and it's another exercise that I find keeps me entertained. Just the play between two parts again, and the dynamic that happens energy-wise. Or you might add a third part if you're adventurous. Folded slabs. Most of you know my work, I think. Let's see what I'm forgetting. A direct knockoff of a little cycladic vase.
How tall is that?
It's pretty tiny, like maybe 5 inches. This is probably the most complex form that I do, and most of them end up being crooked. But I still enjoy making them. Figure it out one day. You have to use foam. Here's my, is it a tulipararia? Tulipia. The closest thing I had to a tulipiere, so I thought I'd throw it in. I call it the Wagon train vase. I only made 2 of them, and my sisters got them, so. And I'm probably going to be shot for this, but I think it's it's the one thing Randy begs me not to put in my slideshows. But I think it's kind of bad karma not to include someone else in your presentation. And he helps me a lot with the heavy work in the garden. So just going to see if there's anything that I had wanted to talk about that I didn't. I think gardens and pots have a lot in common. Number one, a lot of hard physical work. They both have a forgiving quality in that they allow you to change right up to the very last minute. You can change what's there. They're therapeutic. And for those of us who are crazy enough to do either one or both of them, that's a really good thing.
see if I can get this on. Are Walter's slides behind mine? Okay. The eradicator, I'm waiting for that motion picture.
I love the division of labor that they've worked out.
Is that your first one?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the opposite in my house, is that I'm the gardener and my wife mows the lawn. But she's actually a gardener too. So I just have a couple of pieces to show, and so I'm going to revert to my pedagogic self and just pass on some tips that obviously if you're here on an April morning, you're gardeners and potters. These are some tips that you might help. This has openings, of course, in the piece, but to get them all to be where you want them to be, my wife was really upset that she couldn't arrange that, so I just poured it half filled with white sand, and then you add the water. And so you then, when you place your flowers in, in other words, it's not big enough to put in that floral foam. That's the kind of solution that florists usually do. So it's a way, and I could see in your work, you could get some dynamite things. Too bad Elaine didn't have carte blanche with half dozen of those forms. Anyway, but it works, when, because then you have things, where you want them. So it's like you're building something. Anyway, that's one tip. Forward, right? Great. And then this one I showed you before. And here I think what I really like. The other thing by having the lids come off on these pots, which is really critical to cleaning, actually the most functional thing about it for real floral people is you can then put a piece of floral foam in it. Do you see? Because again, if you're making a complex composition, you have to have those flowers where you want them. I mean, because these people are artists, who are making this stuff. And so you have to provide for them. The other thing is if you make these flower bricks, in the last 30 years, what I've realized is, from Elaine's point of view, is don't make the holes too small. Because you can always, because that's going to limit the kinds of flowers that you can put in it. So better to be too big than too small in terms of the top. And one of the things that just shows, I think, her sensitivity is that even though this is about pulling all the stops out, I still like the way that she uses the tulips, like all the emblems, those cultural floral emblems there, they're all kind of leaning over. And so even though they're very stilted and they're decorative. One of the things I should mention, or remind me to mention later, is why I forgot to tell you the real reason why I didn't mix my garden and my thing together. I forgot because I was too wound up the other night. Anyway, but I'll tell you, I think it's kind of interesting. Oh, I thought I'd show you my wife's garden. She was always bossing me all the time, bossing. So I finally said, well, why don't you have your own garden? Do you want your own garden? Yeah. She said, I want my own garden. So this is it. And you get a sense of our landscape. And we, too, have a rock fairy. And he shows up with 2 pieces of dynamite. I mean, literally, he brings this dynamite truck. We've had so much dynamited around our place, it's not funny. And anyway, so I gave her this piece. And it had one of the area with a lot of, and what she did, because she was so, what's the word, when people never change or ask for help? Stubborn. Okay, so I put these rocks across for her, and then she mixed, I think, over almost 200 wheelbarrows full of soil. And the soil mix that I used is sand, peat moss, and leaf mold, seaweed, etc. And she did all 200 by herself and put them in. And this is what it looks like now. So I'm cheating a little bit. I'm pulling it over here because I kind of took over the front, and it's no more. It used to be all pinks and dianthus and carnations, and now it's all dwarf rhododendrons and conifers. But anyway, this is her in her sort of sense. So when you come to our house, this is what you see. You see 65 foot of gray shingles, because all the front of the house, which would be most people's front, all faces the ocean, which is private. So our whole world is between here and the ocean. So I thought, and it also faces south. But I like her sense of color. And when this comes out, it's all purple. It's like the ones over at the MIAs that are blooming now. So it's pretty cheery this spring. So that's it. So that's the side facing the ocean. And you would never see that from the back when you drive down to the house. And the other thing in here that, this again, the native stuff is, these are ostrich ferns. So these will be over 6 foot tall in the summertime. So it's real coolish in that area. It's kind of boggy. And so those are all boggy kinds of things. I've cut down those big mugo pines there by the house. So there you're farther down, you're looking up, you see the pines. And Trolleus grows, crazy. That's a rhododendron hybridized by a friend of mine. And so when you're up at the house, you're looking down, and here's the tree I really recommend everybody here to go buy. If Mother's Day and Father's Day is coming up, and this is a Robinia pseudoacacia. That's a Robinia in the name black locust. So they're hardy in Minnesota, I am absolutely sure, black locust. And it's a special one. It's called Frisia, Frisia. And it's a selection, it's a freak, a mutation that popped up in a Dutch nurseryman years ago. And it's chartreuse, but not chartreuse as in I'm sick, I need more chlorophyll, I need medication. But chartreuse is happy, healthy, gorgeous chartreuse. And now, to get the picture, I had to do this and whatever. But I finally got it to work. It's big enough now so that when you're in our house on the first floor, it's silhouetted against the ocean blue. And again, I'm from upstate New York, so to live on the ocean just flips me out to have that back setting. So you got diamond, cobalt going like this, and then you have the chartreuse tree. And I don't know how many people are familiar with Handel's opera, Xerxes. I am sure that song was written to this tree. So I really recommend, and they'll only get maybe 25 feet tall, 30 feet tall. It's not going to be like absolutely giant, but and in the autumn it turns butter. Okay, then, so all the native plants there are viburnums. We got tons of wild roses. This is just something I wanted to show you in herbaceous stuff. Native, then these are, introduced. Siberian, these are European iris, which for me are fabulous because I really grow them for the foliage because they won't get blown over. See, my big problem, I have a place with delphiniums because Elaine really, really loves them. She likes to pick them, and I really, really love them. But they're all in bondage because the wind will just so you go over to this part of the garden and everything's tied up to a stake. Otherwise, it's going to be on the ground without you knowing it. But one of these forms, and you may have this already in your garden because it's very, very common, but it is such a beautiful iris. It's the same one. It's the wild. It'll grow anywhere. It's tough as nails, and it gets about this big. It starts this way for the first month and then goes green. But the trick with these variegated foliage I found is they're most effective if you can plant them where they're backlit. Like if you put them where the sun hits them, you don't get the full effect. So I hope you don't mind this little gardening lesson, but those are some, it took me a while to figure that out. I mean, my wife says when I'm down there moving plants, she says, Walter, you're like a dog with a bone. Because I keep thinking it, and I plant it, then I run up to the house and I look. I go over there and look, then I go down and dig it back up again, move it over. But that's something I learned about those variegated plants, and I think it's helpful. So this is the native stuff, the Kalmias. This grows all along the highway, Kalmia latifolia. And then because I want to show you what my ideal is. And this is the other native plant, another native Kalmia. This is angustifolia, or sheepkill. Again, tough as nails. And here you can see there's a yellow, that kind of yellow thuya in the background. I just think it's kind of nice little bit of combo. But the real combo I'm after is you go through is I'm trying, because I have 3 acres, I can't garden at all. So I'm gardening by appropriation. So I'm trying not to make a division between the wild and what I plant. The only place we have that is over around the corner. We have a perennial garden, like English borders, for Elaine. And so, but I have them well hid. But because it's the same way in my garden, I don't have any Japanese maples or any, because I don't want that look of, or bamboo of like, make any kind of reference to, I don't have European sculpture. My ideal that I'm going for is, I guess you'd call naturalism. So I don't want it to look like anything else than sort of the north temperate zone. Does that make sense? So the other thing, so you walk through here, and here's the native viburnums, and this is a Kelmia latifolia, the sheep laurel, mountain laurel from Pennsylvania down, and here's a rhododendron in the front, and then all around it are probably wild roses that will be blooming later. And this is even a better one, I think. Here you have our native viburnum, you've got rhododendrons, and then you have blackberries, wild blackberries kind of going in through. And the only problem, this is really low upkeep gardening because, I can mulch it with leaves and bark, and once it grows in, it's fine. But the problem is that you've got to be in there all the time because those blackberries will smother things. And some of the native material is so lusty that it's going to, maybe one summer I'm away and I didn't really watch it, it swamped another plant and wiped it out. But, so in other words, what really looks like people say, oh gee, is this really a garden? You really have to keep, you got to be the garden police in that one. But that's what I'm kind of after, and then that way the whole place looks like a garden. Oh, and this is my project. This is my garden in winter. Normally we don't have snow. And so I got these heathers that are all budded, and they got that bright, clean chartreuse, and I got this I grow a lot of this blue star juniper, which is turquoise, with cranberries going up through it. So then you have these red berries, like red polka dots on it, which is nobody notices but me, and the pheasants. And then the thing in here that is the most striking is, do you see those stems? Those are blueberries, wild blueberries. Our wild blueberries grow this big. And so the lower acre, from the lower acre and a half, from the yellow tree down to the ocean, originally was kind of like this with the blueberries. But if I was going to be able to stay in my house, this is what I would do with it. I would use that blue star juniper, right? Those dwarf conifers, and this would be the blueberries. So if you come to Nova Scotia and Maine in the winter, this is what you see. Because blueberries, if you keep the stems cut down, the new stems come up and they color. And you'll see these, some are green circles, bark, some red, some orange. Those are clones of one plant, you see? And it's spread by rhizomes. So if I could, if I was able to stay in my house, that's what I would do from there down to the ocean. I think it could look, I think it would look kind of cool. But that's also, I think, a good example of a fabulous wild plant. And how many people are growing low bush blueberries in their garden? And they're beautiful flowers, beautiful glossy leaves, fabulous fruit, great winter color. You can't go wrong. It's like, it's almost as good as a pot. Because it works 24 hours a day. Thank you.
Good morning. Wonderful that Walter was my teacher. When I began teaching in 1970, I was at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design teaching printmaking for 1 year. And really great to have you here. Thank you very much. I had a fun Thursday. It's a great lecture. And John, thank you very much. And Randy, my talk will not be, I'm not a potter, neither gardener, but I am inspired by ceramists and gardens. So that's where I stand as a sort of public artist and an artist as such. Always, Shimaoka Sensei came, and Emily, thank you. When Shimaoka came, I don't know, I'm not a potter, but she put me to interpret his lecture at the Institute of Art in Minneapolis. And what he has said is there were questions of what potters do, and then what's the idea of how it comes, and then the creation of pot. And I've been translating Shimaoka's lecture. He said, I don't make pot. The other power makes pot. And what is the other power? Everybody was kind of questioning, and I was questioning too. What do you mean? And he said, dummy, it's a fire. Fire transfers into the pot, and then without fire, you cannot create indeed. And what he meant was like a fire, air, water, soil, clay, all these are part of his creation. And what's invisible stuff inspires to create the object, which means a certain quality. And the object has qualities that strikes our mind, and the mind starts to move, and that life begins from there. So anyway, the Shimaoka Sensei's lecture on this, the other power, stuck in my head. And this is the things, of course, I admired Warren for a long time, and my wife is a quilter, and she is more like a gardener, and she's the one who directs me to the craft world. And I indeed, having Japanese American and grew up in Japan, art is more like within craft, not in a sense of just a painting or sculpture or architecture. And this is the thing, my background is more like being artist. Since I came to the United States, always living in a warehouse and never gardens. You know, I didn't have enough money to buy ceramics, but always living with the plastics and then folding the chairs and then apple crates. Indeed, that was my warehouse living. But in my heart always, I took the first ceramic class from my hotel at Cranbrook Academy of Art, where I came from Japan to study in America. So she was my first inspiration, and I tried. It was too difficult for me. I loved it, but I couldn't make it. So might as well study from making and then the other art areas. So that's the way it comes. But indeed, the admiration to say that the flowers, our ceramics, our environment, I think ecology, all these somewhat connects up, and this exhibition Rob gave me the chance to make things was indeed honoring the ceramists and the nature. That was my piece. Randy took me to a sawmill, and those are the throwaway woods, or at the best, maybe ceramists will use it for the firing the kiln. So that tree, the material I used for this show is to be burnt to transform into the pot, the energy. So those are indeed, I didn't use the lumber from lumberyard, nor art supply store either. Randy took me to the sawmill and then cut-offs. Those are the all materials, 99% of the material I have used. And so honoring again, going to Warren's house, and always his shards I'm interested in. So when I go to Japan, Nancy and we walk around the temples and we find the shards and the sense of history there. When you're poor, you do everything in terms of digging around. And also, walking by the seashore, I found shards, beautiful ones too. And we have found a few, and then I bring home. Somewhat, it's not the broken parts that is important, but the shards has another side of life. And we study those things. I think it's a beautiful one too. So Warren, it's a conversation table was made for honoring Warren Mackenzie. He inspires me, his Mingyue tradition and humbleness and his really the wonderful, wonderful quality of being a potter. And also Randy inspires me. He's an incredible teacher. And his shards, I looked at the students' shards. It was kind of so much incredible stuff in there too. But anyway, he's in Oborigama again, this fire. And honoring him, it is a kind of bird bath. And it is a metaphor, what I have made for this show. It is a metaphor of ceramics and then flowers. What do they go through in terms of life? And work table, bird bath, bird seeds. These are the metaphor of, otherwise the material is nothing, just the water and the clay and the slip and cut off lumber. But the relationship, how it comes out, and in between these things, I find it absolutely interesting. It is an interpretation of those materials, and somewhat I'm caught between those materials. So thank you very much, Emily, for giving me the chance to make something for the birds and for the ceramists and for the flowers. Day before yesterday, Nancy and I were walking our backyard, and the first time we saw a dragonfly this season. It was wonderful. Dragonfly is my uncle for me. Again, the kind of metaphor. My uncle was a great lantern maker in Japan, those huge temple lanterns to small ones he has made. And his life somewhat always comes when I want to pursue the aesthetic life or aesthetic object. He's always surrounds me, and then somewhat the dragonfly became my uncle. So no matter where I go in the summer or in the fall, he comes around and talks to me. So this dragonfly is a wonderful one. And then Nancy said, "Oh, your uncle is here." So that's the kind of whole thing about me, and then trying to make that. Indeed, thank you for the Gaudi's slides and the Ryoanji. Our sense of beauty, I think, is contextualized by somewhat ethnocentric or Eurocentric, Asia-centric. Our background, our subjectivity controls a lot of beauty and the truth and all that. So I think idea of garden, when Rob told me, Kinji, what is your experience? Indeed, my garden has been a survival garden of tomatoes and cucumbers my father planted. When I came to America, my first garden was in Chicago, People's Garden. We made a Bucky-Fuller's Dome for the children in Chicago in our late 60s. And those are my gardens in America and in Japan. So flower garden is wonderfully, I admired always our Dutch tradition and all these things. But my idea of garden is to contemplate life, more like it. So that's where sort of comes. And then I think in art history too, there's a Matisse in the world, and Walter is a beautiful Matisse in terms of garden and artist. There's another one, Picasso's maybe, and then another kind of idea of suffering or joy we express in so many different ways. And being in art, this identity in differences are the most important for me, and I learn from the others. So not identity in sameness, identity in differences. So, okay, saying that, I'll just show you. I brought the slides last maybe 4 years. Nancy that we've been building, and we don't have much of yards, but I brought a few slides, so I'll show you that. Hi, Randy. Randy shows up always.
You're everywhere.
Oh my God. Okay. Here's my slides. I don't know. Oh, after.
Are you in the other? Are you in the other car? Are you in the other car? Oh. Let's try this.
I think I'm behind the Jans. Oh, okay.
Which side are we on here?
There we go.
On the left.
Oh, on the left. This one. Okay. This is my front yard. It's our house in Afton. Our backyard is Afton State Park indeed. And this is the front yard, sort of a dozen years ago, we moved, and very much somewhat Walter is very good buying the flowers, and then in a rock garden, I think Jan and Randy is buying rocks. Where we spend the money is kind of different. But this is the front yard. Sort of, I'm interested in ecologically sound garden. What's that mean? May not be that beautiful, but it's beautiful when at night lightning bugs come. In the daytime, my uncle visits, and then the butterflies come. I think that these birds come. Somewhat ecologically beautiful garden is not quite in a Eurocentric or Asia-centric. It's more like a kind of half chaos stuff. But this is my backyard. That was the front, and the backyard 3 years ago. This is my garden. I lived 3 years by making our studio, and then dug a huge hole. And this is my katsura rikyu, meaning in Japanese Kyoto. In a katsura is a beautiful, like a garden is made to sit one spot and then look out. That's more like the kind of style. But this was, we built a studio, and then this has been my messy garden for the last 3 years. But suddenly after this, my workers, my daughter and my wife, we built pretty much something, whatever we can do. We did it. This stone came out of the ground where we kept, and this is a kind of stone pile on the side, beginning of that. This is our studio, and then as you can see, the yard is pretty much mess. But out of these, we planted wildflowers. This is the final one, sort of. These are the natural wildflower seeds we have planted, and it's prairie wildflowers. And the beauty was that Nancy did sort of this prairie grass mix. She threw all over in the shade and all that. And this is our second year. But last year was an incredible part was that every morning when we wake up, we find something purple stuff coming up, or pink stuff. We don't know what's coming tomorrow morning. And that was a great, great part of our yard, that the discovery it had. And yet, I know what Nancy planted was really this mix of wildflowers. Comes from Oshkosh, Minnesota, and then it is really the indigenous part. So this habitat mix included a few flowers, and I have a little catalog like a wild columbine. It's just incredibly beautiful. Reminds me my growing up in a little bit of part of Japan, mountains. And St. John's wort has the daisy, all these sunflower seeds, things like that. But that was, I thought, I didn't know we were supposed to bring our work. So I didn't bring my work, but my work is like making benches, making bird bath, benches, seatings, more like it. And then it's a part of the dwelling. Seating becomes very much my sculptural language within the context of educational institutions, community colleges, universities, and I'm trying to think globally, act locally. That is the thing. So universities and community colleges, that's my commission context. And our educational environment or state parks very much, it's not the cultural diversity, it's not going on yet at all. It is very much like a 60s building, 70s building, 80s building, and between the buildings are really a concrete walkway or at best, and nothing goes on. Of course, if you go to Ivy Leagues and then California schools, they have a history, so their gardens and their walkways are beautiful. But as a kind of public artist, my commitment is to make the campus, which is conducive to learn each other, so that ground to become much more multicultural and multi-aesthetic experience as possible. And that's my effort has been to make the certain things. But in benches and the seatings where we sit, and as soon as we sit, it's maybe something to do with the Zen idea of sitting. You get away from this linguistic world to oral culture you get in, and the meditation starts to happen, and this body being in the world, all the sounds and everything else comes. So it's a seating or sitting becomes a part of the essential part of our garden experience, or being in the world experience. So that's been sort of my focus. And if since I didn't bring my work, just to tell you that I have a little small bench at the Walker Center Sculpture Garden, right next to the Barbarios is my bench, and a few more benches I have done in New Nicolette Mall between 3rd and 4th. Enjoyment of nature is called, and that's a little bit of separating and going away now. But anyway, those are sort of my examples, my work. And, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Let's see if I can get this up here. What do we have to do? I don't know which. This is. Okay. Should we come up and sit up here? Let me see. I keep hitting these. I don't know this classroom at all. No. That one works. Should we come up here? Get up. Yeah. Face that. Kinji's bench in the walker. I think we should have sign-up sheet and go over and sit. It's one of the most beautiful pieces in the Twin Cities, and we could pick one. We'll go on to ceramics, but I want to ask each of them one more garden question first. What's your favorite garden, or that you've ever been to? You want to take that first, Kinji?
Yeah. Rob showed the real right? Stone, our garden, rock garden. And if you can show the slide, our real slide once more.
Let me see if I can get it up.
Yeah. I tell you, that's one of the most beautiful of sitting garden, of a viewing garden I have ever been in, that's true. And one of the most beautiful parts is the, on the slide, on the right-hand side, very bottom, there's a bench, it's called the Engawa. It's an architectural style, and Engawa is an in-between space between the house and the garden.
I didn't know it was you. Thanks a lot for the help. Can we get this back on to the...
That wood is, I'm quite sure,
I'm
almost
trying to figure out.
500 years old. The wood
Was there another?
polished and polished, and the one you see,
I'm
it's
in-
like that. This is a pair,
Oh, it's
Millions
this.
of people
Okay.
must
Were
have
these?
had before,
Which were the ones
you know.
with the bottom
Right, it's that
slides?
thing
I'm trying to get to my
fresh wood.
slides.
It's all grain and
Must
then
be
you crumbling and all. I have the
Slides
of that. Idea of garden, it's not just a garden, it's that wood. It's not a stone only. You experience wood in order to view that. And 100 people before you, and 100 people will be after you. That's the kind of contemplation that I remember. I think the flower is absolutely nice. And then, yeah, okay. This. This is one of the such a fun of looking at that. And then where you sit. And then this is just a water drips onto that. So this is very functional. And then this, and then there's a seating area. And then you look into that. Okay, nothing growing, of course. But depending on, I have visited about 4 times. And depending on the season, depending on the hour you visit, this is completely different experience. So it's always, it feels like just a stone, but quality of light, quality of air, quality of seasons, you become completely aware of those things. So I think that this is one of the most beautiful, but too bad. I can only show it. I noticed when the rocks said, that's bullshit. Yeah, that's my garden experience.
Jan or Walter, what about
Thank
you? What's
you.
your favorite garden?
Well, that's an impossible question, but it's
I mean,
interesting.
or place where you had a
Right
good.
away when you asked that question, I thought of this garden too, because we visited it when we were in Japan, and it had such an impression on me that I think of it so often. And I want to do a gravel garden down by the little shed. And I think about this garden, but I didn't have a clue of what that meant.
Nah. Yeah,
I didn't even see the vision.
yeah.
But I don't know. There's so many gardens and they offer such different things. I love Kinji's, the wild fairy garden, Walter's garden. They all offer something different because each garden has so much of the person who created it, and then it's almost like choose a favorite pot. How could you possibly do that? Because we have all these.
Well, if you're a potter, you can have 100 favorites. That's only the layman.
Well, then in this gardeners, we should have 100 favorites.
Right. And we're on the downstairs.
Right. Well, Walter, what's your most recent top 100 favorite garden?
I tell you what
What
my
was the-
favorite garden is, and you're not going to believe me. You're just going to think I'm really off the wall, but I assure you, I've been medicated, and it's true. It's Versailles. It's Versailles, because what you see there is unabashed art. This is pure art. This is artifice. It's beyond artifice. It's the total self-conscious building, using nature as element in constructing like a piece, if you will. I mean, those pleached lines where they bring these lime trees up out of gravel, and there's all these trunks, and then at a certain height, they're sheared, and then the top is a huge block of green. Do you see? It's like, it's better than Brancusi. I mean, it is so beautiful. And that same notion, and that notion of gardening is artifice. I find it best when it's really upfront and out. I have a little trouble with Japanese gardens because a lot of them are kind of fake. I mean, they're trying to look like nature, and they're not nature. And I think you can see some of that in, Renaissance gardens. But I like it if you're going to be controlled, whatever, you do it. Otherwise, what gives me real inspiration to my heart of hearts, and not necessarily my brain, because this other stuff has to do with brain. It's art, it's serious stuff. But what drives me nuts myself is the landscape around where I live. Did you see it where the man was standing capped in steel? You see how beautiful it is, and like the blueberries coming up through the conifers? Well, I go lay down, and sometimes I'll even go out, and my neighbors will see me with my cup of tea, and I'll sit there and I'll look at this stuff. And it is, I find it just so beautiful. It's so incredibly beautiful. But I don't fool myself into think that's gardening. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So what I'm trying to do, you see on my garden, is to really use that stuff, but in such a way that you're not aware of the artifice. You see? So I'm trying to fake you out. And that's probably why I use Mayelica. Whereas in my heart, I'd never showed you the porcelain I made. So I'm using fake porcelain, and and my garden is really not what it seems. You know those blackberries, wild blackberries that are growing there? I mean, that's all planned in the sense that I'm allowing them, to meld those wild roses into those rhododendrons. Even though it looks, you see, I didn't go in there with my Roundup.
Well,
so I guess that's telling the truth.
That's the art that hides art, right?
I guess, but
I have.
But don't you like Versailles?
I've never been, so it's just pictures. I've never been, and I've got to go. They're in Rio Anji. Can I do that in the weekend?
I think Rio Anji and Versailles have a lot in common because they're incredibly controlled, sophisticated. I mean, this is like high art, connoisseurship level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe, to me, like an Olmsted is another one, besides the real one. I think Central Park, all these incredible idea, incredible legend, which keeps us going. And Deborah is here too, Deborah Karasov, and she's the one, again, taught me in terms of ecological stuff and then the other things. But Olmsted is our artist of all times, I think, in terms of garden and all that, So Central Park, not everybody can visit, or they don't have, maybe lower east side people cannot visit our Central Park, but in their mind that the Central Park is there, so they can survive within that kind of lower east side. So we all have incredible ideas which sustains us for survival, and then I think that those are, incredible gestures that they have made.
This last year, when we were in Turkey, you see again, what you see in Greece, that the wildflowers, I guess, probably would be my best, the things I like. And the tumbling of the blood red poppies just tumbling down, a hillside. It's like, and you go by an old mosque, and part of it's all broken down, and it's being recolonized, the wall, by this incredible campanula. It's just, and there you have the whole thing of time and who's winning, score one for nature. But yet it's so beautiful, but there's still meaning there. There's still meaning. It's not just image. I don't think, again, those prairies, grass,
Yes.
and the prairies with the wildflowers. I mean, it's like, and if my wife had her own way, I'd round up the whole property and buy a ton of wildflower seed. And the thing that I really have to get from you today is what I do. It's put me on your list of seeds.
Okay, the trading bazaar starts.
Sorry.
Okay.
But I was thinking about the definition, thinking about this conversation that we're having, what is the definition of garden? I was actually going to look it up, but I was thinking about when we lived in Norway, their definition of the garden was the yard. It didn't matter if it was about flowers or anything. That was about the garden. Kenji now has expanded me into this conceptual garden that has no limit. I think about my garden and how
Yes.
garden historians. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's
In
what we're
addition
looking
to that, Walter, I think picture of Capra speaks about the idea of life of garden, or life of tree, you know. And he speaks of not only the beauty of, colors and then our trees, flowers. Again, he's speaking about the tree, and just think about the life of a tree. Not just the color, what gives us oxygen and the carbon monoxide, all these scientific life of a tree. Then if it's an apple tree, how many birds this life of a tree from the beginning until dark, how many birds that it has fed for their survival, how many bugs they have sustained to live. All the birds again comes, and then our flowers of apple trees and then all that. So the life of the tree, Capra sees the life of a tree and how many other lives this life sustains, relationships to the other. And then I think that is another incredible beauty. Again, invisible one, not just colors and shapes and all these things, but indeed from the ground level, how many warmth sustains this. So interconnectedness of a tree, when we understand that, and beginning to death, it doesn't die. Indeed, it becomes another creatures to sustain another life. But I think that's to me, Capra's understanding of tree becomes absolutely beautiful, and then he shows me the other side of this life of a tree. So that's
It's similar to the one quote that I think is so true, that has to do with gardens, was written by Thomas Fuller in 1660. And he said, "He that plants trees loves others besides himself." And I think that's so critical. And on one level, you can see it in an ecological sort of interpretation of Kinji. And on another level, one of the reasons, if you go to Europe and you see these great gardens and great parks, and then you come over here and it's like, ooh, what? Well, one of the things is that over there they planted trees that look great after 100 years. They're just starting to come on their own. What do we do in North America? Our whole landscape business is based on planting trash. Literally trees that grow up really fast, look good, and in 60 years, they're starting to be sick. Insects attack them, which they love, because then you hire these people to come and spray them. And it's things like the native birches, they're really, the white birch is a trash tree. The balsam fir, the Austrian pine, that's just stuff. In the forest, it moves in after a fire, and it provides a kind of just a background for the real trees, like oaks and hemlocks and white pine. And you see those trees, the cedars of Lebanon, those trees that are going to look great in 200 years. And that, I think, is something that if all of us did, was plant one tree that's going to look great in 100 years. And all along, it's going to be feeding birds and insects.
That's right.
And,
right.
Et cetera, et cetera. We could transform North America in 100 years.
What was is it The Man Who Planted Trees, John
That's
Giano,
right.
which won the Academy Award for the animation, for animated version. I feel we should go to ceramics. But I have to, I was reminded by Walter of the other side of non-gardening. That is, the 2 days 30 years ago when, as opposed to looking out at that delightful field of low bush blueberries, I was picking them for some friends in Nova Scotia, and my back has just about recovered except for these chairs. So there is another view of nature. Asking questions, I feel like I'm in danger. I have to grow my little beard, and the next thing you know, I'm going to be asking your favorite curse word and what you're going to say to St. Peter. But I wanted to ask each of you to maybe, as a way of moving to ceramics, can you talk about your favorite, we're back with the 100, but your favorite pot, either that you've seen that has flowers, connected to flowers, or that you use at home or for flowers? I mean, do you have a pot that you keep and why that you like? Your wife does it, Walter, but what about you, Jim?
No, I have to go last because you're just killing me.
Yeah,
I need another pill.
Well, yeah, we need a.
How am I going
We
to
need
think
a.
of that?
We need a.
One pot?
What's the one that you
It's
saw?
like your favorite child.
No, most recent. Pick the most. But
I do have a favorite child.
what about you, Jan? I mean, Jan, do you have a pot that you use for flowers, like on your table all the time, or do you rotate? What about you, Kinji? You have a lot of pots in your house. Do you have one in particular that sits on your desk, or do you rotate them so you don't play favorites?
Yeah, I think we just we don't have a special one now. We have fused from Japanese milk bottle becomes flowers. It's a kind of glassware to pots that we picked also in Mexico. We paid about $1.50. One little flower goes in, and little tiny one by the kitchen window. That's one of our favorite. As well as we look at of course, Regis and Jan said, now I want to have one Walters for my flower arrangement or something like that. Yeah, we have all kinds, old one to new one, unknown to known, and depending on the season, and just we enjoy putting flowers in it. So yeah.
Now, Walter, I know you saw 300 favorite pots yesterday at the MIA, but what's your latest grand enthusiasm?
No, I think that to me, like, which I just have to go, and I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm going to have to break in the middle of the night or hide myself in the toilet with bundles of tulips in the Rijksmuseum in Holland. Those tulipiers that are these structural things just knock my socks off. I mean, I really think. And I've never seen one of the really big ones done up like they would have done it. You see, what I love about historical ceramics, what I try to trace myself down, is to contextualize it. You know, all those Chinese pots and stuff never sat in cases. I mean, that is so fake and phony, it's not funny. What I find interesting is to try to figure out where they live, how were they dealt with, material culture. So imagine those dealt big things. What would they be like in those dark, dingy, with all those oriental rugs and all that? I bet that would be so fresh. But my favorite pot in our own house that we live with, that I live with, is my son is a glass blower, and he made this piece he thinks is awful. And it's about this tall, and it's a sun shape, a Chinese sun shape, but it's in glass. So if you look at the Chinese bronzes, they go like this. You know that shape? It's so clear.
signifiers of lip, neck, then it's belly, then it's foot. Well, he did it so it's all kind of, you're not, you know, it's kind of a some sensibility that you don't know where one part ends and the other part begins. You know, sort of like, and that is, I find so beautiful because it's up high under a skylight in the stairwell, and so you can put big things and you can see the stems, so then they become, you know, kind of an interesting thing. And you put stuff in like those giant aliens, those great big things like that, and all winter long we keep it full of forsythia. So it's not, but it's close to a pot.
Sounds pretty
You
good.
can't get any closer than glass.
Do you want to explain, without, so we don't all go home wondering why you did keep gardens and ceramics separate?
Oh, it's real simple, and because I didn't want to do a kind of real naturalistic rendering, which I finally gave in to do, right? I didn't want to do that. That was too easy to like draw flowers, and especially with Mayalka, it's very easy to get kind of like a watercolor effect. And the big issue that I was dealing with 30 years ago was what's the decoration, or the difference between decoration and painting? Is this a decorated pot or a painted pot, right? So I mean, that's like so nuts, and I'm berating my students, and what is, and of course, George Woodman, in one of his articles, points out, which I think is really important, that painting is, you're dealing with a silhouette. It's kind of like a canvas. So when you look at Oriental pots, most of them are painted as opposed to decorated. After the kind of Tokugawa, and all the kutani, all that overglazed enamel stuff, that's decoration, right? Whereas decoration is really about organizing space. That's really what it's about. And it's about telling the viewer how you want them to see the form that you made, or the shape that you made. That's decoration. So here I was, so what I said, and John Gill said, well, you know what he said? Because remember I told you I was bringing in those leaves? Remember the blue one? And I was doing this kind of expressionistic Zen brushwork with my leaves sitting on the table. And so John said, Walter, what you got to do is make stencils. So in other words, you see, instantly, what you do there is you stylize, make them an idea, you make them a shape, and that's what you're kind of dealing with. That puts them more in the world of decoration. And that's what I was interested in doing. You know, if I wanted to do the other thing, I probably would have went that way. But this way, I'd never worked with those things. So you see, like all that stuff on my pieces, those are all made from little cutouts out of whatnot and whatnot. It's like once you take a leaf and you trace it out, and then you cut it with scissors, you changed it instantly. And then you take those leaves and you put them like this, and you do them out, and put them like this, and do them out, and then you look at the negative space in between, and maybe you're going to use the negative spaces of those leaves instead of the positive. Like, that's decoration. And it was very exciting for me because in all my schooling, I never learned about decoration. You know, modernism is not about that. So. Anyway, so that's why, does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what we're talking about?
I'm just wondering about Jan, you know, who would have suspected Jan making Metallica? That, I'm still reeling from your watering. But you decorate, like the platter that's in the sale shop has decoration, but the pieces in the exhibition gallery don't. Did you, in that, I mean, that kind of drawn decoration, did you start making flowers or vessels that had drawn decoration and then say it doesn't need it? Or, I mean, they have the embossment.
I still have that. Do that painting, but it just became I think because, like, I love something famous, and so I have to keep narrowing, because I get overstimulated and get crazy. And then I have found that I've been able to grow, by doing that, by narrowing the boundaries, grow more expected. So what I do, I would love to go back, but for me, it's so much about playing, the colors and
For the record, I was sitting behind Jan when Walter was talking the other night, and Jan was laughing even harder than everyone else when you were talking about drawing the one bamboo on the piece.
I haven't left that car for that long, for so long, and my feet twice, my feet as long as really went. I looked at it and thought, what's going on?
But I think it's because we all went through it.
But if you didn't notice, when you go back, if you go back to the show, the tray in the sales shop, the decoration's beautiful, and there was a cup which may or may not have sold, which had your little mug, which had decoration too, which is beautiful. Kinji, do you want to say something about the virtue of raw wood and wood grain as opposed to painted decoration?
Yeah. Decoration has an interesting connotation, I think. Very, to me, the kind of a bourgeois connotation it seems to have, or aristocrats connotation seems to have, those who are satisfied with the material need above and beyond the kind of decoration to enrich one's own life. And so there's a playfulness, and it is one aspect, very, very conservative notion of historical being one has to entertain in order to be decorative, I think. But again, idea of a thing in itself, the kind of it decorates itself too. Tree decorates itself, stone decorates itself. But this idea has nothing over indulgence, but its own essential kind of being what they are, and the truthfulness and the goodness of that weight of the stone with the gravity, that lightness of bamboo, the metaphor of how much they can take the snow and it flips back. All these life-giving interpretation has something to do with the nature of our being, our struggling, enjoying all these things. It comes when you look at the life of the bamboo tree, or life of a rock, life of a tree. And then that essential part I assimilate. So inquiry into our aesthetic experience is inquiry of myself, and that's all. So it doesn't go anything beyond that. So they are also decorative as well as essentially non-decorative kind of, dualistic nature, I suppose, to me.
Garden questions from the audience, ceramic questions, marriage counseling questions about how to keep the marriage with the garden.
Well, I think the best example of that, where it's most graphically and dramatically shown, is if you look at the really kind of funky Iga or Shigaraki wares. And those effects, because we're talking about surface here, right? And you can do very self-conscious surface, like the Yelloka is even about making a sow out of the pig's ear, right? You're trying to fool people that it's torso. That's a whole idea, and that's very, very, very self-conscious in that way. But those Iga pots, which were refired the tea master told them to push that wall in and break it and push it down when they were making it to make it funkier. Those shigaraki pots with all that stuff on it being turned in the kiln for a certain kind of effect. That was art. You know, that wasn't your folky, let's go to Korea and get a tea bowl stuff. I mean, that may have been the model, but these tea wares were incredibly self-conscious. But you see, it was self-conscious in another way. It's the opposite way of, you know, painting a scene of a park on a pot. That's all about something else. So in other words, Andrew is absolutely right. I mean, those are incredibly decorated pots, decorative pots. Our problem with it is the word, is that modernism has made the word decorative a nasty word. Decorative means something that's like overindulgent, something that's not necessary, like ornamentation. You know, let's just have pure cement. You know, it would be terrible to put a tile on the floor. But this floor, polished cement, I mean, we look at it. I think it's a decorative surface. It's got its own kind of fabulous quality to it. You see what I mean? And so sometimes maybe you're decorating with a kiln, and in my experience, the easiest pottery I ever made in my life, and one of the reasons I got out of it was salt glaze, because the kiln did it all. It did it all. And then when I started to actually decorate, I realized like what a moron I was. I had no skill. I had no knowledge. I was absolutely lost. And my stuff was just so awful. Because I had come through a time of ceramics that was very easy.
Interject that for me, the basis of the pot is the form. The house is doing it all.
Well, I think, the way I define shape, or form and shape, it's kind of like function as utility and decorative. I mean, I think form is, it's about the total piece. And I think that, you know, a piece of pottery is incredibly complex. I always took issue with, Cardu's notion of the monumentality of form, that, you know, once you have somehow that, because I think most people defined it in terms of shape. So in other words, I think there's a lot of pots out there, the shape is not so great, but ultimately, the decoration saved it. And the decoration, maybe it's this kind of decoration, very self-conscious, painted, overlaid enamel decoration, or what happened to it in the kiln, what kind of surface it got, how it was positioned. The shape was not that fabulous, but what you get come out, you know, is this form. And I think form has to do with proportion, the clay, the color. It's like everything that goes into line, color, space, form, and texture. That to me is what form is. I think seeing it as kind of like shape, and being able to make a decision that when it comes off the wheel, I think those are kinds of things that can really come out of modernism. And it's a kind of, it was a fashion. And it's too simplistic. A piece coming off the wheel, it's what, 40% done, 30% done, doesn't have a foot, it hasn't been handled yet. I mean, it's just beginning its life. And you know, you might have a little baby that looks cool. It could grow up to be so ugly. It's like, you know, or you could have a lovely little baby, like a monkey, and they turn out to be Bridget Bardot. I mean, you know, that's how I see it. I see pot as being very, very complex, and that and there's very different ways, and each way has a different meaning, and it's carrying a different sort of information load. You know, some pots are very, very much about process.
Walter, how do you interpret then, like a Native American pots, their decoration or their need to decorate?
Oh.
What is that?
I mean, I think that is they're like so incredibly different. But I think are interesting. I mean, one of the things that's so, oh yeah, yes, it is decoration. They're defining the shape, the form, and the shape of that piece. But I think what's so interesting there is that it's carrying, again, different kinds of information. It's carrying
the hill or whatever. And why do you do it?
Beat me.
I think it's wonderful.
No, my wife thinks pottery is the worst thing in the world, and she says you're just a masochist. You have really ultimately low self-esteem. You have all these kinds of problems because you work for a whole week on something. I mean, really, you might put 60 hours in something, and I only wish my electric kilns, I could count on them coming out. And then you come out with, crap. And it's like you waste, you put all this time and energy, make 4 or 5 things, and spend weeks and weeks. And if you didn't screw up the art, the technology screws up and it all, boom. Or you get a beautiful piece and a week and 2 days later, it's done. It explodes in your room. I mean, who needs it?
So what keeps you going in the face of all of it? And then in the face of, plants dying and hail and...
I think probably the gift of the elements of the sky.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can so that when you take the pot out of the snow, there's like, so that's what that pot is, and that's what happened. And I wonder what I think about that. Same thing with the garden when the bloom comes. When it comes out of the ground, it's like this constant revelation about something beyond yourself, something bigger than yourself. Okay. What's life without that? It's boring.
I think you're right.
I think so too.
Living on the edge and
Assuming that it's life, I think, a risking and a discovery. It's very empirical rather than scientific.
But don't you think gardening is easier than making hot?
That's I have to ask my wife.
Because you got God. I mean, God helps you in the garden. I mean, you got God. If you don't like it, he kills them plants. And then you think, oh, in the meantime, there was 2 other things I wanted to, and they had no room for it. Now I got, you can say, well, it's a virtue of necessity. I got this empty slate finally. But with Todd, you got like a broken art. We had all this friggin' expectation. You knew how great it was going to be all the time. And then you got this lump.
So on that same note, you were talking about one of your gardens that you took 8 years or whatever to get something,
And
and then it died. But you have the more immediate deal in your pot. If it doesn't work, you can start on the next day. You don't have to wait 8 years.
That's true. I find this potter the most fabulous thing is working doing drawings and working on all the stuff, doing all the stuff. And when it's glazed raw, it's so great. And you put it in the kiln and stop. And sometimes I think I don't want to turn that kiln on. Because that means I'm going to have to open it. And lately I'm waiting a day or 2 to open it because I don't want to be depressed because I got this meeting tomorrow with the students and I got to be real cheery and I can't really say that. You were in the wrong field. I mean, look how easy painters have it. Could you imagine, imagine a painter who went in and worked all day, painted this great painting, and then the next morning they came in and all the paint's on the floor. I mean, that's the analogy to ceramics. In painting, you go through ideas a mile a minute. What if? If you change the figure color. In ceramics, we plod along. I mean, it's like, it's only because I think you're right. It's like, if you do get a winner, 1 of 10 in your life.
Yeah, and everything is like painting because it's constantly overriding. If you don't have those 2 colors together, let's just bring in another one. You can change everything.
You have to wait till the next season, like the next. But we're about to end. Walter mentioned his son. I hadn't thought in quite the terms Emily introduced about time. Do something and then wait. Plant the garden and then wait. As I said to someone yesterday, after looking at all the flowers, it's like, but we're not going to get flowers like that next week in our gardens. We have to wait. But I once met Oiva Toika, who some of you may know, who's a great Finnish glass artist and ceramist. He designs production work. He's the person who does the little birds that you see in gift shops, but he also does huge sculptural work. And he was talking about art students who spend all their time and thinking, what am I going to do, and getting all worked up for 6 months so that they can finally make that piece. And he said, with glass, you have to make it fast because it breaks fast. So don't waste any time, just go at it. Ceramic's a little different.
But one thing I just wanted to add is I think is really, really important and critical to potters. And I think, again, it's that question of what's appropriate. If somebody said to me, what is appropriate to make out of clay? What is the most appropriate thing to make out of clay? Would be something to do with plants and systems, because clay is literally the earth. When you take it and use it in a piece, it's signifying earth. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's even more basic, I think, to making a food dish. It's like clay is made so plants. I mean, after all, it's clay. Things don't grow in sand. You have to have clay in the soil to carry the nutrients, you know, the ions, because of its surface structure, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, literally, I think that there is a connection.
I think clay as well as rock, as well as tree.
They have ground up clay. I know. It's clay before it's been ground up. I mean,
Yeah,
like
it can be big. Yeah, it can be. Yeah,
it's just hanging out.
it's an interpretation of that. Interpretation. Interpreted concept. But anyway, to me, it's sort of in search of meaning, not just the process, but the things that have certain qualities and meanings. And then clay seems to have incredible this, you know, you're in Nova Scotia, stone has a meaning. If you're in Scandinavia, maybe wood has more meanings. Or if you're part of Japan, somewhere in Mexico, then clay may have. It's a regional environment that determines what it is. If you live in a bamboo forest, definitely bamboo can become everything for their nature way of life, and then it assimilates life. So to me, but clay is such an incredible thing that it is true that when I admire clay people, is that the so earthly people, you know. It's indeed in oral culture they seem to reside, not the literal culture. And the more they make, the more they have ideas. It's the same thing being a sculptor too, that the idea does not come out of nowhere. It's not a concept. Derrida says, well, philosophers, they don't have hands, artists do. And philosophers always seeking the meaning in terms of language and the literature. Well, you know, Ravi is a scholar, so he is in search of meanings in terms of language. Meaning of language becomes very important. But for us, meaning of things or material, it's the more we work, the more we have ideas. Without working, no ideas will come. Really true. And the hands, and then this being in touch with the earth, and then the air, and the water, and the fire. I think his soul is always with it, and that's I admire the most of all these kinds of people. Thank you very much for being around.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can, could I adopt your uncle? Or could your uncle adopt me?
Yes. We'll negotiate that. We'll negotiate that.
Well, I think none of us are ever going to see a dragonfly again the same way. I mean, we're going to be Hindus.
On that nice note, let me thank you all and thank these three artists who clearly are in the right field. Thank you all. Thank you. Great.
So if anybody comes to Nova Scotia, call me 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. Contact me to see if I'm home, and we might be able to negotiate a trip to the garden. But you got to say, we met here. You actually came to this session at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning.